Hello and welcome back. Now, Austin Matthews went ballistic last week. 5 goals, 8 points, 23 shots in only 3 games. That's over 7 shots per game. He's on pace for 70 goals right now, so I hope you weren't playing against him last week. I was up against Fantasy Tipped in the Creators League, a battle of first versus second, and I got whomped, partially thanks to his partner in crime, William Nylander, who also went off. 2 goals, 6 assists, 8 points in 4 games. So I'm currently on pace to lose by 40 points in that matchup, and I'll be honest, I'm fed up with Tage Thompson. I sent out a message that he's available for trade, and I'm taking some offers right now, so we'll see what ends up happening with that. But for now, we have to improve our team week by week, and so let's look at the schedule for week 11. Now, 49 games in only 6 days this week. No hockey on Sunday for Christmas Eve. No teams play 2 times this week. Everybody's got at least 3. There are 2 teams with 4-game weeks, and they're not equal. So Detroit with the best schedule. They've got the light night Monday, Wednesday, Friday, the perfect trifecta right there, and the back-to-back on the weekend. So 4-game week with 3 light nights. Then you've got Minnesota with 4 games, but 3 of those on the heavy nights, and 2 of them against Boston. So a little bit less favorable for Minnesota, as they do have some stiff competition and a front-loaded road back-to-back. But we will look at both teams in detail. We will also look at Winnipeg. They've got the perfect Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule. Even though it is a 3-game week, that is nice because you're not going to get a lot of volume from your guys on Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, as there's 11, 12, and 14 games on those days. And then you also have Seattle with 2 light night games on the road in Dallas and on the road in LA. Those are tough matchups. And then they also have this one, a little bit of an easier matchup against at Anaheim on Saturday. But that is going to be a crowded day for your roster. 14 games, so a ton of guys are going to be in action. Now, this is also the point in the season where we need to highlight the Senators. They have 57 games from today onward. LA with 55, Washington with 55, the Devils and Edmonton with 54 games from this point onward. So those teams are the guys or the teams that you're going to want to pick guys from the rest of the season, because they will have to pack in a lot of game volume into not that many days. We will look at a couple of goaltending options from the Devils and some other teams as we move forward in the video. But as we always do, let's start with the best schedule and look at the Detroit Red Wings. Now, we were talking about them in the previous weeks because of that Dylan Larkin injury. Robbie Fabry was the guy I was looking at. I picked him up in one of my leagues. 9% owned, 6 points in his last 7 games, a power play point in there as well. And he's been doing it for a little bit longer than that Larkin absence. So 13 points in his last 12 games, 15 and 18 on the year. He's been a consistent goal scorer and a producer when he's in the lineup and healthy. That's been the key for Fabry over the last number of years. He just can't stay healthy, but when he is, he's been very productive. 9% ownership is too low for him. He would be my number 1 ad from the Red Wings this week. You also have Michael Rasmussen, 7% owned, dual eligible, which may be a little bit favorable because of the fact that they do have that Saturday game that you're going to want to have some flexibility for. 5 goals in his last 8 games, including 8 points in that span. So he's been getting it done. You also could have looked at Joe Veleno at 5% owned. He's 3 points in his last 3 games, 2 of those on the power play. He was first line with Kane and DeBrincat, but I believe JT Compher is coming back to the lineup, which may mean that Veleno gets knocked back down in the pecking order in terms of centermen. So maybe not the best ad or time to add Veleno this week. So the only other guy I'm looking at in terms of potential ads that you could have, Ben Sherrod at 8% is a nice hits and blocks defenseman, over 3 blocks per game in his last 7 games, along with 12 hits in that 7-game time frame. So he's been getting it done, and he is 81st percentile in hits on the year, 86th percentile in blocks, and he throws in the odd assist here and there. So he is kind of a little bit better offensively than some of the other hits and blocks D that you could get out there. Just doesn't get a lot of power play time. And then speaking of Red Wings, we need to talk about their goaltending because they will get at least one other start from somebody this week. They have a 3-headed goalie monster in net. Husso came in relief for Alex Lyon, who got hurt in Saturday's game, and he was perfect, 18 for 18. So his save percentage has jumped back up. 241 goals against, 936 save percentage in the last 3 games. He's 59% owned. Lyon is also available on most waiver wires. If he's healthy, he might get one of these starts. And James Reimer hasn't been bad in a limited sample size this year either. And, you would potentially want to target these goalies on this Monday matchup against Anaheim and on this Friday matchup against Philly. Now, Philly's a good team, but they play a lot of defensive style hockey. The last game that they played against the Flyers was a 1-0 game, so not a lot of offense, which could be good for your goaltending. And we will look at some of that in detail going forward. But for right now, Ville Husso is probably one of the ads that you would want to have if you have the option to do so. But let's take a quick look at their scatter plot to see how this pairs with some of their top guys. So way over here on the right, you've got Dylan Larkin. He's been their best player, arguably for the last number of years. 13 power play points, 3.45 shots per game, over a point per game, 25 points in 24 games. So it really does suck to see him not in the lineup. He's been one of my favorite players over the last number of years for fantasy. You have Mo Seider way up here, 89 on the completeness rating, basically a 90. He's one of the top 5 or 10 most complete players in fantasy right now. 2.3 blocks per game, 1.9 hits per game, getting 2 shots per game, 11 power play points, 18 points total in 30 games. So he's one of those guys that's been getting it done. But you can't have any of those guys. You also can't have DeBrincat. So Lucas Raymond is an interesting option here. 2.2 shots per game is a little bit low, but 6 power play points, 24 points in 30 games is not bad for this right winger. Here's Gostisbehere. He's been one of those power play specialists. 11 power play points on the year, 21 points in 29 games, but the peripherals are a little bit low as to be expected with him. But if you can go out there and grab him, he's definitely an option for power play points. And then you have some of these other guys. Daniel Sprong, he's usually a goal scorer, getting it done on the power play as well. Here's David Perron. He's suspended currently. I believe this continues through this week. And then you have Ben Sherratt right here, who we mentioned in this video. You've got Jake Wallman, who's been a surprise offensive threat this year. 13 points in 28 games, 4 of those on the power play, 2.8 blocks per game. So if he's available, he's another option for you if you're looking for a complete defenseman. Same thing with Petrie. He usually gets power play time wherever else he's played, just not getting it with the stacked Detroit blue line, with a number of other guys getting that power play time. And then you have Michael Rasmussen, who we talked about here. He doesn't get power play time either, but the goal scoring has been there lately. Other than that, Kopp and Veleno, not necessarily the best options, and then these guys are pretty much unownable. One thing I did want to note, and you can't see it, it's off the screen, Jonathan Berggren had changed 22 spots. He was up to a 48 or a 49. I believe he had a pretty good stretch there leading into his being sent back down to the minors. I think he had 4 or 5 points in 7 games before getting sent back down. So I don't know why they sent him back down. They're putting out feelers to see if anybody wants to pick him up. So if you see his name pop back into the fold, he would be an interesting option as well. But now let's turn to the other 4-game week this week, and that is the Minnesota Wild. For Minnesota, we've got a number of different options. You've got some veteran guys like Ryan Hartman, used to get that number 1 center spot with Kaprizov and Zuccarello, and that was the reason to own him. He was playing really well in that spot a couple years ago. 2 assists, 8 shots, 5 hits, 6 blocks in the last 4 games. So he's been probably one of the more complete options that you can find on the wire at 19% owned. He is dual eligible, so that does help as well. It just hasn't come for him or Kaprizov. Kaprizov only 6 points in 10 games since the coaching change. But in that span since the coaching change, you've got Marco Rossi playing a little bit of a bigger role. 5 points in his last 7, 1 of those on the power play. So he's been getting a little bit of an elevated role in John Hines' new system. So 9% owned, he's probably there for you. You also have Marcus Johansson. He's been playing pretty well in the last 7 games, 4 assists. He's negative 4.3 goals above expected, meaning he is worst on the team in terms of that metric, or best, however you want to look at it, in terms of him potentially breaking out any day now. 2.4% shooting is also really low. So the assists have been there. If he can add the goal production in this week, that would also help. But they do have these 2 difficult matchups against the Boston Bruins. So maybe not the best time to pick up a guy who's waiting to try to score. Maybe, an easier matchup would help out Marcus Johansson. So in the meantime, a guy that I started to pick up a couple weeks ago was Brock Faber, 5% owned. 4 assists, a power play point, 15 blocks in his last 7 games. He's been really productive in terms of a blue liner for them. They haven't had a lot of consistency back there. They're missing Spurgeon again. They're missing Brodin, at least lately, the last game or 2. So with those guys absent, Brock Faber gets an elevated role, playing around 20 minutes a night, and he's getting some power play time. So if that's the case and he's only 5% owned, that would be a guy I would look at as a potential pickup option for assists and blocks mainly, but getting a little bit of power play production in there as well. But let's move it on to another team with a really nice schedule, Winnipeg, the 3 light nights, and there are some matchups here that are favorable. They do have Boston, which is, again, not the best matchup, but they do have this game on Monday against Montreal, and then they play Detroit on Wednesday, so there are some opportunities there. If you can go out and get him, Nick Ehlers, 51% owned, single position left winger. I believe he's dual position, or at least he was for a majority of the time that I've seen him in the last number of years, but 10 points in his last 6 games, 4 goals, 6 assists, 20 shots, 3 goals, 3 assists, 6 points, 9 shots in his last 2 games. So that's in the time since Kyle Connor has gone down. But before he went down, he was also productive, 5 points in the 4 games leading up to Kyle Connor's injury. So he started to get it going before Connor went down, started to pick it up even more in the elevated ice time that he's been getting with Connor absent. Another guy that's getting an elevated role, Gabe Vilardi, 23% owned, dual eligible center right wing, 7 points in his last 4 games, 4 goals, 3 assists, so that's really encouraging. And on the year, 9 points and 11 for Vilardi. And last year, he was one of those goal scorers on a 30-plus goal pace for the LA Kings. Then he gets traded and gets hurt immediately. So he's been out for a number of games at the beginning of the season. Now he's finally in the roster, getting an elevated role in the top 6 with Connor missing. So these two will probably be your best waiver adds this week if you can go out and get them. There are a couple of other guys we can look at. So let's take a look at the scatter plot to see where these, Iafallo, Nemesnikov, Perfetti, and DeMello stack up. So you can see all the way over on the right is Kyle Connor. He's over a point per game, 28 points and 26. 17 of those were goals, so that's a really big loss. 3.9 shots per game as well. So I'm hoping that none of you out there are going to panic in the absence of Kyle Connor, because there are some options you can pick up. They're just not going to be quite as good. Here you have Josh Morrissey playing pretty complete hockey, 80 on the completeness rating, 8 power play points to go with 2.5 shots, 1.4 blocks per game. So he's been kind of that consistent defenseman that they need. Here's Mark Scheifele over here. He's pretty much owned up as well. So of these other guys you can grab, here you have Nino Niederreiter. He's getting up there because of his hits volume, 1.1 hits per game, 2.3 shots per game, 17 points and 29 is not the craziest pace, and he's not getting a lot done on the power play either. So maybe that will change with Connor's absence. Maybe he gets some power play time, but he's basically a goal scorer and a hitter. That's what he's been known for in the past. Neil Pionk is a good peripheral defenseman here, 1.7 shots, 2 hits, and 1.3 blocks per game. Only 2 power play points, 10 points total on the year, so not the best file there, but he has been getting it done with the hits and blocks lately. Here you have Nick Ehlers, 2.6 shots per game is a little low for him, but he has been increasing that over the last 6 games, 20 shots in that span, so over 3 shots per game. So you're looking at a guy who's trying to increase his numbers, getting an elevated role. This would be the main pickup. I actually have owned him for most of the season already. So Ehlers has been getting it done for me. You have Brendan Dillon over here, 2.69 hits per game, 1.5 blocks per game. So a hits and blocks D, not a lot of offensive production, but 9 points and 29 isn't the worst for a hits and blocks guy. Here you have Perfetti, 19 points in 29 games. He is getting some power play time. A lot of that was earlier in the year, so maybe we'll have to wait and see where he slots on this power play right now. And then here you have Iafallo, same type of thing, low shot volume, couple of power play points there, 15 points in 29. DeMello over here, a little bit less of a hits and blocks D, 1.8 hits, 1.5 blocks per game, 11 points in 29 games. So pretty similar to Dillon, but just lower hits volume. And then you have, guys like Adam Lowry, you've got Iafallo and Perfetti all in this range. You've got Appleton, who's occasionally a good pickup, 16 points in 29 games. 6 goals, 10 assists is not a bad split there. Just not a lot of shot volume out of him. And then you have Nemesnikov down here. Again, the shot volume low, 14 points in 26. So kind of in the same, spot right there in terms of where they rank in Winnipeg ads this week. Not necessarily the best, but not necessarily the worst either. But if you can go out and grab Ehlers or Vilardi, those would be the plays. The rest of these guys are ownable for specific purposes, but you kind of have to look at either where they're being used or the hits and blocks element. Now up next, we have another team to look at, and that is the Seattle Kraken. So with these guys, we've got a couple guys at the top of the lineup and a couple of hits and blocks D that are getting an elevated role. We'll start with Bjorkstrand. 2 goals, 2 assists, 4 points, 2 of those on the power play, 11 shots in the last 4 games. He's 38% owned, and he's had a pretty good year, 25 points in 32 games. He is a goal scorer and a power play specialist, so he's been one of the guys that's been getting it done. Jared McCann isn't quite as good as he was last year, but he is another option. He's, I think, in the mid-70s in terms of ownership, so he's not available for you. Tolvanen might not even be available for you. 2 goals in his last 3 games. He's been getting it done with a lot of hits volume this year. He's been very complete, and we'll see that when we look at the scatter plot. And then you also have Will Borgen. So the last couple games, they called up Riker Evans. They've been splitting ice time kind of in that 10 to 13 minute range. But Will Borgen, 4 assists in his last 4 games to go with 9 hits and 9 blocks. And then you also have Riker Evans, 4 assists in 4 games with 2 power play points and 4 blocks. He's on the second power play unit, even though he's on the third pair. So they've been kind of splitting those minutes, but Evans is getting the power play time. It just depends on what you need. Do you need those power play minutes, or do you need the hits and blocks? Obviously, Adam Larsson is the main guy for hits and blocks, and as we look at their scatter plot, you don't see any major superstars over here in this range. You just see a lot of guys clumped together, and that's what you're getting out of them. Not a ton of offense this year. The highest guy is Eli Tolvanen, 79 on the completeness rating, because you're getting 2 shots, almost 2 hits, and 1.2 blocks per game. And you're getting 20 points in 32 games. 8 of those are goals and 5 power play points. So Tolvanen, that's why he's 55% owned. He's been very complete in terms of category leagues, covering all of those different categories. But then there's some other guys here. Bjorkstrand is the number 1 pickup here. 25 points in 32 games, 2.7 shots per game is pretty good for him. And then you also have Schwartz. He's out on injury. He was red hot before he got injured. You have Jared McCann, another guy that I usually like to go to. His shot volume 2.7, a little bit low for him. He was above 3 last year. 8 power play points, 6 of those power play goals. So if your points league weights those, but obviously McCann is a little bit more owned up. Vince Dunn is 90+% owned up, so he's not available for you either, even though he's got 25 points in 32, and he's got 10 of those on the power play. And then some of these other guys, Larson, you're looking at shots, hits, and blocks, 1.9, 1.6, 1.8 respectively. And then some of these other guys, Yanni Gourde has been getting it done with the shot volume lately, averaging over 3 shots per game in his last 5 or 7 games. Then you've got Will Borgen here, who we mentioned. Here's Ty Karche. He's a goal scorer in terms of the way it's breaking down for him. 6 goals out of his 11 points, but just not a ton of shot volume, nothing on the power play. So not the best ad, but if you do need specific goals and you're looking for a spot start, maybe that Anaheim game would be enticing to you. Somebody like that could potentially help you out there. Here's Eberle. He's been ice cold as of late, 14 points on the year. It just hasn't been working for him. It hasn't been working for Beniers, and both of those guys are below expected. So Beniers minus 3.1 goals above expected, Eberle minus 4.4. So if you believe that they're about to break out any minute now because of that fact, they could potentially be good ads. Beniers is a little bit more owned up than Eberle, and he's been relatively disappointing this year, if I can find his numbers. So 13 points in 32 is disappointing for him. 6 of those on the power play. Shot volume is low, not getting a ton of hits and blocks, so not as complete. And he's been regressing in the wrong direction. So that is something to make note of. Pierre-Edouard Bellemare, can't find him on here because he's probably not one of those guys that you would normally own. There he is all the way down at the bottom. 5 points on the year, but a couple of those 3 points, I believe, came in the last 4 games. 2 goals, 1 assist. So he's been climbing, but he's still relatively low. I wouldn't necessarily recommend adding him. But this is going to do it for the player ads this week. Let's turn and take a look at the goaltenders. But before we do, there's something I wanted to bring to your attention. These are the team metrics over the last 2 weeks, and there's a couple of interesting things to note here. Winnipeg and Minnesota both tied with 1.71 goals against per game. They've been very good defensively, as have the Philadelphia Flyers. They're third in goals against per game. You have Vancouver here. DeSmith has been playing well. Obviously, Demko is playing well as well. And then here's Seattle, fifth in goals against per game. So you're looking on the right. Joey Decord is the first guy that we'll talk about, but this is why I wanted to bring this up, because a lot of the guys that we're going to talk about here, these teams are playing better defensively. The Devils down here, 2.67 goals against per game over the last 2 weeks is an improvement for them. Some of the usual suspects like LA, Boston, Arizona. These teams, have been there for a number of weeks now, but some of these other teams have kind of, snuck under the radar and played pretty good defensive hockey. So let's start looking at some of the goaltending hubs for these guys, and we'll start with Joey Daccord. So Philip Grubauer goes down with an injury, and in comes Daccord. You can look at their team defense. As I just mentioned, they are playing much better defensively, 93rd percentile in expected goals against per game. Daccord is below expected in terms of his goals saved above expected number here individually, but the 908 save percentage, 2.6 goals against. And as you can see, in the last 4 starts, 2 wins, 954 save percentage, 124 goals against, and a shutout. So since taking the ball and running with it, he's been a much better fantasy own than guys like Grubauer, who have been very frustrating over the last couple of years, actually. For him, at 19% ownership, he might be the best potential starter that you have available for you on the waiver wire. But another guy that we do have to talk about is Kochetkov, as the Carolina Hurricanes just sent down Antti Ranta, or at least they're assigning him to waivers or putting him through the waiver process. He may or may not go down. But Kochetkov, 52% owned, so he may be there for you in a 12-team or a 10-team league. 82nd percentile in terms of team defense, so that's what you're mainly owning him for. It hasn't been the best file this year, an 890 save percentage, 2.8 goals against on the season, but he does have 2 wins in his last 2 starts, and they were very good starts, 965 save percentage and 1 goal against in each game. So he's been a little bit better as of late. And on top of those metrics, he's, I featured him in the Week 9 video, so we were talking about him a couple of weeks ago, and if you picked him up since then, he's been much better. 5 wins in his last 8 starts, 943 save percentage in those wins. The only problem is he's got a 692 save percentage in the 3 losses in that stretch. So if you're in a categories league, he's not necessarily the best for your weekly coverage, because he might throw in one of those games where he puts up a terrible game and destroys your goaltending for the entire week. But in points leagues, he's been very valuable, as he doesn't cost you as much if he doesn't perform. And if he does, you're getting a ton of really good starts. So 5 wins in his last 8 and a 943 save percentage in those wins. So that's the main reason to own him. Obviously, you want that exposure to Carolina. Normally, they've been a little underwhelming this year, but hopefully they're back on the right track. Now, another guy that you could potentially own in terms of a starter, or at least a 1A, 1B situation, would be Martin Jones. And he's come kind of out of nowhere, signed in the offseason. People were wondering why, because they had Joseph Woll there. They had Samsonov, but this is why. They had 1 injury. They bring in Jones in those 3 games that he's come in. He's got 2 starts, but he's got 3 wins because he came in relief. 949 save percentage, 1.85 goals against. And then you've also got, the team defense isn't the best. It's not the same defense that they had in years past. The total save volume is going to be low because he hasn't played a ton of games. Same with the games played percentile, which is why he's a 48 on the goalie hub. But you're looking at the goals against and the save percentage, and this is potentially why you would want to own him. Only 20% owned right now, and with him and Samsonov playing, they are potentially going to be splitting things 1A, 1B. Samsonov has been a little bit better as well, so that could be another play, but I think he's pretty much owned up. And he did regress a little bit last week as he dropped about 5 spots. He's got an 878 on the season, so Martin Jones could be the 1A going forward, and that would be an interesting play if you could scoop him up off the wire and get access to that amazing Toronto offense, who is going to give them a ton of run support. Now, if you're looking for good goaltending, not, necessarily getting that run support, but definitely getting the support in front of him, Sam Ersson. This Philadelphia Flyers team has been really good. So Ersson was also featured in that Week 9 video. 7 wins in 11 starts, 2.52 goals against, and 2 shutouts on the year. As I mentioned, Philly is 3rd in the last 2 weeks in goals against per game, 7th on the season, but they are number 1 in expected goals against per game. So very good defensive team in front of him, so that's what you're owning him for, this 99th percentile team defense. He's right around expected in terms of goals saved above expected. Carter Hart obviously playing really well as well, but this is a guy that you can potentially own at 8%. And one thing that I've saw in the broadcast, if for whatever reason he gets into a shootout, he wins every single shootout. So not that you can plan for that and pick him up for that specific purpose, but a lot of times these goalies play really well. They get to the shootout, and it's kind of a coin flip, but it's not with Ersson. He's been really good in the shootout. 7 wins on the year, as I mentioned before. So getting really good defensive support, getting the wins, chipping away at those with this Philadelphia Flyers team that's very gutsy, and they're in a playoff position right now in the Metro, which couldn't believe we were ignoring these guys in the offseason. They had a much better roster on paper than a lot of people thought with Couturier and Atkinson coming back, and it's showed now as they are one of the better teams in the Metro. Now, another team in the Metro that we could look at for goaltending is the New Jersey Devils. As we saw before, they are now 10th over the last 2 weeks in terms of team defense, at least goals against per game. And Schmid has been playing a little bit better, Schmid, however you want to say it. In the last 2 weeks, 2.67 goals against per game for the Devils, and Schmid has been playing a lot better lately. So has Vanacek. But of the two guys, I think Vanacek has a .902 save percentage, Schmid right around the same place in terms of what he's been doing. But 3.1 goals against, around a .900 save percentage, a little bit below expected, but he's only 31% owned, whereas Vanacek is 78% owned. Now Vanacek has 3 wins in his last 3 starts, a .263 and a .902. So Schmid is probably one of those guys that's going to fly under the radar a little bit, but he has the potential to take that number 1 spot, or at least the 1A spot, and he is available for you in a lot of different league formats. You can see 4 wins in his last 7 games is impressive, 2.49 and a .903. So the Devils still not quite the same defensive team they were last year, but they're definitely getting the run support for their goaltenders this year. And then speaking of guys that you would potentially want to have from these top defensive teams, we just looked at Ersson. Karel Vejmelka is not the starter anymore. Connor Ingram has taken that role. Connor Ingram is the 5th best goaltender on the goalie hub right now. So you're potentially trying to get access to that team. And Arizona is one of those teams that has a really good defense right now. 6th best in goals against per game over the last 2 weeks, 11th on the season. So they are protecting their goaltenders quite a bit right now. And Vejmelka is slowly but surely, getting back to form, getting back to the place that he was last year. 1 win in his last 2 starts, .938 save percentage, 2.01 goals against in that stretch. Again, on the season, not the best numbers, 3.2 goals against, .899 save percentage, and a shutout. But you're trying to get access to these either top defensive teams like Ersson and Vejmelka, or the top offensive teams that are going to give you run support like Martin Jones and Akira Schmid. That will potentially help you in points leagues, whereas the team defense will probably help you in any league format with your goaltending. One other mention that I wanted to bring to your attention is Fleury, and it's not necessarily what he's done, but it's what their team has done. So since that coaching change, Minnesota #1, as we just saw, in goals against per game. They're 12th in terms of season-long expected goals against per game. And Gustafsson has been a top 3 goalie both in the last 2 weeks and in the last month. So one of their 2 goaltenders is reaping the benefits of this team defense, and this will only continue to rise as they keep playing at this pace. And then you can see Fleury here, 1 win in his last 2 starts, but a .928 save percentage and a 2.55 goals against. 47% owned, so he's probably not there for you in a lot of different leagues. But if he is, and if you want that spot start, again, they do have a 4-game week this week and a front-loaded back-to-back, so he will get one of those 2 games. He will probably get that Pittsburgh game on Monday night, I would imagine. So that would be the place to pick him up if you want a spot start. But yeah, Fleury, Gustafsson, those 2 guys should be benefiting from this coaching change, and already Gustafsson has benefited from that, and I would assume Fleury will start to reap some of those benefits as well. But that's going to do it for this video. Hopefully you got something interesting out of this and you can find some waiver ads for your team heading into week 11. If you have been performing well, let me know in the comments below. If you have any questions, I've been trying to answer as many as I can. It gets tough. Obviously, I mentioned last week I've been busy. It's the holiday season now, so that is going to complicate things, but I'll try to get to all your comments as best as I can. But thanks again, as always, and I'll see you in the next one.